Are your history resources stuck in the past? Well, here on Resource Review, we'll be evaluating 3 that you might not have seen before. They are 2 CD-ROMs for creating short historical documentaries.
We're going to be making a film, or you're going to be making a film, about the worst day in British military history.
A series of history books for Key Stage 3.
It does sort of make the children think about imagining what it was like if they were there, which is great.
And a CD of World War II reminiscences. Will our panel give them the thumbs up? Find out here on Resource Review. Joining us to recommend today's resources is Colin Hinson. Colin is a freelance educational writer. On the panel today, we have secondary history teacher and author Ben Walsh. Welcome, Ben. And joining Ben, we have Heather Scott. Heather is a history teacher and deputy head at Allerton High and chair of the Historical Association's secondary committee. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Colin, let's begin with your first choice of resource, which is a set of 2 interactive CD-ROMs from Film Education, History in Motion, one on the first day of the Somme and the other on D-Day. Now, presumably there are many interactive CDs available for secondary history. So what is it about these 2 that you like?
Well, you're right. There are lots of interactive CDs for Key Stage 3 history. There's no doubt about that. What makes these particularly special as resources is it allows people to actually create their own history using the resources that are available in this CD-ROM, because what it does, it's a video editing suite, essentially. And what you do with this is you can put into that suite video clips, sounds, commentaries, which you can create yourself or from the CD, to create a newsreel.
Well, thank you, Colin. Before we discuss it any further, let's go and have a look at this resource in action. We visited teacher Paul Drummond at Queen's Park Community School in London, and he was trying out the first day of the Somme with his Year 9 class.
We're going to be making a film, or you're going to be making a film, about the worst day in British military history. The software we've been using today is a film education production called First Day of the Somme.
Clip 1. Brain shot.
So what we've done is the students have had a look at the clips, and then they've chosen different sounds and different sound effects to go with the clips, and they've created their own 60-second long footage of the first day of the battle. There are some weaknesses to the package. I think the fact that the students kept finding it crashed, or they couldn't save their work apart from on their own machines. Now, whether that's a technical problem at our end, it's certainly a problem we had in setting up today's lesson. But my overall feel from the software, they were teething problems rather than inherent problems. The biggest improvement would be when we actually show the film, if the film would be a bigger size on the screen rather than the tiny little one now.
I'm learning from this, like how people, what they went through and how World War I was and how much they suffered.
I think the best thing about it was really good fun. They get to look at lots of different footage, original primary sources, and I think it triggered interest. There were a couple of projects going on within the school which this is directly relevant to, and 1 or 2 students were very, I'm going to use this, and this is something that I want to add to this project I'm doing. I will definitely use the package again, and we'll try and build it into our Year 9 schemes of work for next year. It's a really good package, and it's certainly an exciting way of looking at history.
Well, Colin, Paul Drummond really seemed to like this resource, but he did seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties. He said that with the pupils it was crashing, and there was this issue of not being able to view the film on its own, sort of blown up full screen size. Are there limitations of this resource?
Well, I can only comment on one of those. Obviously, the reason it's crashing is, who knows? Get the IT person to have a look at it and see if there's something that he or she can do. The other comment that he made about the size of the film clip, I can absolutely understand that, and that is a sort of minor limitation.
Well, let's see what our panel think. Heather, what are your thoughts on the first day of the Somme?
I think it's an excellent resource. We saw Paul using it in the classroom in pairs, didn't we, where they were using two students to one computer trying to make a film out of it. And I think it has real potential for them engaging with this primary source, and it's fantastic. It depends what the question is they're being asked, though, doesn't it? It's what are they being asked to create, and from what perspective.
Yeah, well, let's hear what Ben thinks first. Ben?
I'd like to draw attention to the supporting material that is in there as well. You've got a detailed introduction and notes on all the clips written by top drawer academic historians, or film historians rather, and I think I don't care how well informed you think you are as a teacher, when you've read these things you'll learn something about the film clips, the way they were produced, the government machinery behind the production of the resources that are in there. It's fascinating even without the film, to be honest, and with the film I think it's the sort of thing that will inspire teachers, and inspired teachers inspire kids.
Can I just ask a question? Do you feel that the pupils might really engage in the editing side of this, have fun putting in their own sound, but focus on the multimedia side of the task rather than the history?
Well, no, I don't think that's going to happen, because that depends on the skill of the teacher as much as anything. And if the teacher, if he or she actually sets the particular pupils a task with a time frame for that task, then you'll find that the pupils will less bother with that multimedia side of things and more concentrate on focus on what they're supposed to be doing.
On the history.
That's right. Yep.
OK, well, thank you all very much. Now let's move on to Colin's second choice of resource, which is a series of history books called Digging Deeper. So, Colin, here is one from the series. So can you just explain the series to us? There's 3 books in the series, is that right?
That's right. There are 3 books in the series. They cover quite a lot of the Key Stage 3 part of the history curriculum. The first one is 1066 to 1500, so that's the medieval period. It then goes on to 1500, 1750, so the early modern, and then 1750 to 1900, so it covers the sort of Victorian period as well.
OK, and what's the style of these books?
The style of the books is that it concentrates really on 2 things. It concentrates on content and on historical skills, and then once you've established those skills with your pupils, you then go deeper into the book.
Let's go and see what somebody else thinks of this resource. We went to Ackland Burley School, where Head of History Bonnie Morris told us what she thought about Digging Deeper.
The resource that I've been looking at today is the Digging Deeper Heinemann textbook. The series covers Key Stage 3 history, everything from the Middle Ages right up until the 1990s. The book has a number of benefits. It's quite personal. They try and make it quite interesting. It's parts of history that perhaps other textbooks don't look at so much, sort of quirky parts of history that the students want to know about. It does cover those. It does have some great sources, some great illustrations, some quite funny ones. So it's slightly more empathetic perhaps than some textbooks have sort of veered away from, which is actually not a skill in the curriculum to be empathetic, but nonetheless something that actually kids really enjoy about history. And so it's quite nice to see that that's coming back in a little bit more. It also has a lot of sources, and wonderfully for a textbook, it sort of says where the source is from and goes into detail about that, which some textbooks seem to forget. So it's nice to see that they do try and help students when they're answering utility questions, actually sort of say where the source is from, when it was written, why it was written, which is a great relief. It's maybe not enough just on its own. I would almost think of it as a sort of a time out for the lesson, and it might help with sort of going back and looking at things in a bit more detail. I would need other textbooks to supplement it. It does, to quite a large degree, manage to sort of really capture the individual pupils' imaginations by the way it's writing the text. It does sort of make the children think about imagining what it was like if they were there, which is great.
Well, Colin, a fairly favourable review of the book series, but Bonnie did point out that these shouldn't be used in isolation. Is that something you would agree with?
I'd agree with that, absolutely, yes. I wouldn't regard these as the only resource that you would use for teaching these particular subjects, simply because of the approach that they take. It's something that's supplementary, if you like, something as an add-on to the more sort of basic resources that you would use to teach these subjects.
Right, OK. Well, let's see what the panel think. Over here, Ben, coming to you first, your thoughts.
I think what's interesting about them is that in some ways they're inconsistent, but in a good way, in that you have one spread, for instance, I'm looking at one of relating to the British Empire here, and it's a great big painting that dominates the double-page spread, and there are lots of interesting pointers sort of directing students to sort of what the painting is trying to say. In contrast, you'll find another section where it's very, very heavy on text. You know, so I do think that maybe they're trying to, you know, doing a good job of breaking it up, but there is a lot of text sometimes.
Well,
and
I mean,
think
the
you
books
need
are
to be
very
aware of
thin.
that.
If they made the books a bit fatter, then they could spread it out a bit more.
Perhaps,
I mean,
yeah. I think that's obviously a publisher's decision,
yes,
isn't it?
and cost, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, $6.99 per book.
And I think that is a realistic figure for something that isn't going to be your core text. You know, for something that's actually going to sort of to be icing on the cake rather than the cake.
OK. Heather, what do you think?
I think I agree with Ben that some pages I'm looking at, this is the second book in the series, and it's absolutely stacked full of text. And for some of our less able students, this would be dreadful. This would just overface them completely. The only thing I would say, the only thing in its favour that I particularly want to draw your attention to is if you're looking for a particular skill, so that your students are particularly bad at how to analyse a picture, then you'd use the skills section, wouldn't you? You'd go there and say, right, I'm going to do this lesson on this, and just build them up. And then maybe pick another bit out of another book.
One last question for Colin. It's not a particularly new series, but you still think it's one of the best out there?
From my point of view, yes. I mean, certainly because of its style and content, I think it's one of the best out there at the moment, yes.
OK, thank you. Well, now let's move on to Colin's third choice of resource, which is a double CD, an audio CD from the Imperial War Museum called The Home Front. What's on the CD, Colin, and why do you like it?
Well, one of the reasons I chose this was because a lot of nearly all the resources that pupils are given in the classroom are visual in some way, whereas this is purely listening.
When I arrived in London on the 1st of April 1939, I knew the war was imminent.
They're people reminiscing about their lives on the home front during the Second World War. And so I chose it because it's actually a new way of learning about history, if you like, because pupils are encouraged to use a variety of sources.
Right.
And this is a completely new one. It's sound alone.
OK, sound alone. Is this going to engage your pupils?
I think it's interesting to hear what the people who were there said. You know, it's first-hand experience, and that's always fascinating. But I think you'd be very careful about how much and for how long, because some of the clips are quite lengthy. So you'd only want to use a few minutes, a few seconds, but depending on what your purpose is in the lesson.
OK. Ben, is there enough guidance? I mean, maybe I should ask Colin this, but is there enough guidance for teachers to really get the most out of this resource?
There isn't much guidance there. It's not aimed at teachers. But I personally, and I know a lot of teachers, like that sort of thing. There are a number of interviews in there which are decidedly left field compared to the standard sort of story of the war. So I think that there are very few teachers out there who wouldn't have sufficient craft to make use of this thing, even if it isn't spelled out in words of one syllable.
Great. Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. But just to recap, the three resources that we looked at were History in Motion CD-ROMs from Film Education, the Digging Deeper textbook series from Heinemann Educational, and the Home Front double CD from the Imperial War Museum. For more information about all of the resources that we've talked about today, go to our website. It's teachers.tv/resource review. Or if you want to, email us. We're at resourcereview@teachers.tv. All that remains for me to do is to say thank you to the panel, to Colin, to Heather and to Ben. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Resource Review. Bye-bye.